Hello, this is Kevin. I'm in the Camellia sinensis schoolroom here in Montreal. Obviously, we've been having no school activities recently due to the current pandemic circumstances. This is our first summer session in a way. We have sent out a couple of hundred of these kits, which full of delicious teas, which come with this flavor wheel, and you've got the kits and you're all set up. The video is going to be available for because you just sat watching and it sounds like we're drinking some delicious stuff, which we will be. You can still buy the kits. We have online and we have some in the shops as well. So hurry up and get those while there's still a couple of left. There are some exclusive teas that are only in this box that we bought especially for this session. This is take two. Some of you joined us in the first one where we had quite a lot of sound problems. So if you've come back, thanks for coming back. We'll try and make it even better than last time. And I'm going to first of all show you the setup that I have on the table here. Obviously we're going to be drinking tea for a few hours. Perfect way to spend a nice Friday afternoon. So what we need is space to make tea. Obviously I'm using my tea boat. Many of us have these at home. If you don't have a tea boat, you could replace this by a folded towel. That's no problem. Just something that's going to pick up the drips as we are making tea. I like to have a bowl on the side because there's often a little bit of extra liquid that needs putting over there. And I've got my handy little wiper towel here. Obviously, you want to get out all your favorite teaware so we can be using all those beautiful teapots that we keep on the shelf. I've got a lot of my favorites out here. I'm going to introduce you to each one of them as we go along. The timing as we go from tea to tea, we're going to try and do 8 teas in 3 hours. We'll see how it goes. I tend to move quite fast. If you're finding that the timing is a little fast, don't worry. Like I said, we're going to have this video up online and we enjoy a moment with these amazing teas and as a group of tea lovers online. Information wise, I'm going to give various different levels of information. I'm going to try and keep it as a family show, not get too geeky. I know we have a lot of beginners watching and quite a few old-time enthusiasts. I know I've got some friends from other tea companies, so nice to have you there, everybody. You know who you are. Today I am going to do all my infusions in what we call Gong Fu style. So that means rather than make a large teapot where I infuse the tea for 3 minutes or 4 minutes with a large amount of water, I'm going to do small infusions, a lot of leaf, a small amount of water, and I'm going to do several infusions of each tea. So we call this Gong Fu style. Now each of these teas, you will find them on the website. So if you miss my directions and timings or weights and so on, all this information, you can see it on the technical sheet of each tea where we have the infusion instructions down at the bottom. So we have two little buttons to press. One is for a teapot infusion and it gives you the regular teapot infusion, and it's that you have, if you have the kit, that's what you have printed on the bags. This is to make it in a teapot. And most of these teas you've got enough to do today's session a couple of times and make a couple of teapots. Now, if you press the other button down at the bottom of the data sheet for the tea, you will see that it has either Guan, Sencha Do, or a Gong Fu Cha option for the tea. So that's where you will find the timings for each infusion, the weight per liquid, and so on, the weight to the tea to liquid ratio, tea water ratio. And there you can find all the details of how to do the type of infusion that I'm doing here today in this session. Let's have a look what else. I'm going to basically focus on the flavors of the teas. I'm going to try not to get too technical, not too spiritual, somewhere down the middle line, and talk a bit about the tasting dynamics. I'm getting quite thirsty. I'm just going to finish my tea that I'm drinking, a fantastic sample from Bachan at Junchiabari. If you're there, Bachan, thank you so much for the fantastic samples. Tea's always great. I'm going to put this on one side, and we're going to move to the first tea. So let's see. I'm going to use for my first tea our famous infusion beaker, which you've probably seen. We use them all the time. We use them in all sorts of different tastings. They're not expensive. It's a great way, very, very versatile tool to make all kinds of tea. Has the advantages of also being transparent, so we'll see the leaves opening. Great for Gong Fu infusions. I'm going to show you how to do that. I'm just giving this a little rinse with some warm water to start. We'll put that in there. So now we are clean and warm and ready for a first infusion. Here we go. I'm going to put this here. So, our first tea is the Jin Yin Zen. So I'm going to hold that up here so that you can see the leaves. How's that? Beautiful white silver needles. Yeah. Beautiful white silver needles. Yin Zen actually means silver needle. Now this we call the Jing is an agronomist, tea producer, teacher. He works with various research institutes in China. He teaches, and his garden is full of all different kinds of cultivars, all different kinds of experimental process going on in his garden. He's a master of many styles of manufacture, and we have been buying quite a few different teas off him. We're actually going to taste 3 of his teas today. So the first one is this one. It's the Jin Yin Zen. Now, we've been buying a regular Jinning, a regular Yin Zen, sorry, not from Yuding, not from Jinning, but from Fujian. So this is not from Fujian, where most of the traditional Baihao Yin Zens come from. It's the same cultivar. It's the Fuding Da Bai, which is the name of the cultivar. But we found that the prices in Fujian are getting a little expensive, and for the same money, and we are getting the same quality or even better quality from the same plants growing not that far away in Zhejiang, where Mr. He has his garden. So this is one he made. We find that it is certainly for the price, more for the money, and we're quite happy to replace the Baihao Yin Zen that we've been selling for a few years with this very beautiful tea. So I'm really thirsty. I'm going to make the first infusion. I've put 5 grams of tea in here. So that's the equivalent with a tea this size of about 3 teaspoons. Like I said, all on the website, you can check this out. This is a 400 gram measurement. So I'm going to fill it up just halfway and do a 200 milliliter infusion with my 5 grams of leaf. We'll try to wet as many of the leaves as we can as we pour it in. And I'm going to give that a little 30 seconds. I'm going to leave my hand on top of it so I don't forget that it's infusing. I could tend to do that while I'm chatting. And so This is a good example of one of the teas that we have been developing outside the traditional prestigious region that a tea originally comes from. We had a few teas in the list that have quite an extensive prestige ticket on them. And what I mean by that is that there are many of the classic teas that come from original growing regions, specifically in China, that are linked to a very specific terroir, a very specific piece of land of geographical indication. So this limits the amount of teas, first of all, but it also means that teas coming from that region have an extra ticket on them, the prestige ticket, that puts up the price just because they come from that very specific piece of land. I'm just going to make sure everybody here in the room gets a little bit of that. So let's have a taste of the first infusion of this Jin Yin Zen. Straight away we notice the beautiful silky texture. It's got a very, very smooth attack. It's like it slowly opens up in the mouth, and then it fills the mouth with this very light, delicate, beautiful herbal impression. White teas are very interesting because though they have this very delicate, subtle delivery, there's a lot going on in there. There's an extensive amount of complexity in these white teas, especially when they're well made like this one. You have to consider with a white tea that we're not talking about leaves. As you noticed when I showed you this tea here, this is buds. So this is as the plant is growing and the first bud begins to open, it has not yet become a leaf. This is the potential of a leaf. This will eventually open up and become a leaf as it develops. So it hasn't done any photosynthesis. It barely has any chlorophyll at all. It hasn't lived as a leaf. It hasn't developed fibers or any of the structure of a leaf. It hasn't developed that leathery exterior membrane that we get in the mature tea leaves. So it's very delicate. It's the taste of potential. It has a lot of the aromatic chemistry, but it doesn't have those secondary elements that we get as it opens up, becomes a leaf, and starts actually interacting with its environment. So it's quite exciting at this time. Beautiful taste of potential. So let's make a second infusion, see what that tastes like. These leaves are already nice and wet. So again, I'll just keep it nice and short. We don't need to do a large infusion. We can keep it small. Or little pieces of particles floating in there. A lot of these come from the hairs on the leaves, which are called prepubescent hairs that grow in this immature state of the leaf. Here we go. Here comes our second infusion. I'm just going to sneak a smell of these leaves. Oh. Let's try a second infusion and see what we think of this. An interesting way to discover white teas, if you've never really discovered the silent power of a white tea, is to taste alongside with scotch. If you pair a white tea with a scotch, it's fascinating how a delicate, very quiet in the mouth white tea can dominate a scotch. and can quite change the flavour of a Scotch if you're using the sandwich method where we go tea, Scotch, tea in a tasting. Many of these very delicate white teas are very, very strong in a tasting like that. So it's a nice way to discover both Scotch and white tea, is to taste the two together. And a tea like this you could pair with most kinds of Scotch, even something really peaty would go nicely with this. So I'm going to try this. Now it's starting to fill out. Again, great complexity. Notice on the second infusion, the attack is faster. In the first infusion, it was a slow, gradual release. Now we've got a faster attack. The leaves are already nice and warmed up, and we've got a little more powerful punch as we start the flavour, tapering off into that beautiful long aftertaste with floral aromatics and fruity and peppery, all sorts of different notes in there. I have a question here.
Peated or unpeated Scotch?
Actually, both types of Scotch would work, either with or without that beautiful peaty flavour. I've tried it with both. I'm thinking something like either something like even a Talisker, which was more something with a medicinal flavour, or a very rich Lafroig would work, or you could go for even something like a Balvenie, something a little sweeter and more caramel. You could try them all with this tea and try. Third infusion, let's have a go. Notice I'm getting slightly shorter on each infusion here. I'm trying to pull out a little more flavour. I'm going to leave this a little 40 seconds now, just a little bit longer. Let some sap some more chemistry out here. So when we do a short infusion like this, and we do a series of short infusions, what we're doing is we're allowing the water to react with the flavour chemistry of the leaf in different sequence. So there are certain chemical elements in our tea here that are releasing into the water very, very quickly. So in our first infusion, we were tasting a lot of that. Second infusion, some of the ones that are a little slower to dissolve into the water. These are coming into the water at that point. Now we've got a little bit of a mix. Some of the stuff that we had in the first infusion has already disappeared. We've already got rid of that. So now we're on our third infusion, so we're exploring what happens a little later in the infusion. If you imagine that we are doing a teapot infusion for 3-4 minutes, at that point we have a great big soup of all those moments of tasting all put together. So that way we pull out almost everything, but we don't get that detailed analysis of those different moments that happen throughout the infusion. So another thing I'm going to do here, I'm going to try and put this out here. I'm going to use my fingers while somebody gets me something to use. And let's have a look at these beautiful leaves. Buds, I should say, not leaves. How are we doing here? Beautiful infused leaf. There we go. So, that's good. Let's... Yeah. Everybody at home keeping up, or am I going too fast for you? Empty vessel smells absolutely delicious. Worth smelling your the empty vessel here. Here we're getting all sorts of volatiles, and one thing that's really interesting to notice at this point is that if you smell the wet leaf, the vessel that you use to separate your infusion, and then the liquor, the three all have different noses. Now on the third infusion, we're starting to get subtle. The attack is more quiet. Still opens out on the front of the tongue after a short period of quiet, but we're not getting that nice boom that we had in the second infusion. I think I could have left the third infusion a bit longer, maybe up to a minute for this one. I just left it 40 seconds this time. Delicious. So that's one to look out for in our catalogue, the Jin Yin Zen, particular favourite of mine. I'm going to put this on one side. Over here. And then we'll just do a little housekeeping. Make sure we respect each of our teas equally. So that's nice. At this point, we're between two teas, between our two first teas. We can start to feel how nice intense brew that we had of that white tea. Another good example of that silent force that we have with these beautiful white teas. So, and now I'm going to move to a second tea. And I'm going to brew it in one of these bottles. So I know many of you watching have travelled in China, so you've seen these all over China. This is a very typical way of infusing tea. And many of you have these that you use for school, for work, etc. So these are very useful when we get somewhere, we've got a bag of tea, we make our tea fresh, and we use some hot water at work or at school. They're not the best for travelling around with hot water. They don't hold the heat that much. We call it a travel beaker or a travel bottle. And the best way to use it is to travel with it, with a bag of tea, and make tea when you get there. So we can either fill it up, it's about 300 milliliter capacity, or we can use it with a Gongfu method. I'm going to use a second vessel so I can separate, excuse me, I can separate the liquid when I want it separated. I'm going to warm up my two vessels. Make sure everything's nice and warm to start with. I could pour it in the boat, but I like to have a little bowl on the side, especially with a big session like this when we're doing many teas. The boat starts to get full, overflows, we get that sinking feeling. And I'm going to put my second tea. Now I weighed these before we started. I'll show you the dry leaf in a minute. This is a big leaf, it's hard to get it in the bottle. Oh, I lost a few there. So I'll show you this beautiful leaf. Here we go. So many of you that have some experience in tea, you will be recognizing the shape of this straight away. It's a long Jing style leaf. So in the Camellia collection, of course, in the catalogue, we do have an original Longjing, or perhaps two or three, from Shifeng Mountain, Meijiawu Mountain, and so on. Every year they come in. We buy a small amount. They're extraordinarily expensive because of, as I was just talking about, this prestige ticket idea. So, our friend Mr. He came up with this beautiful long Jing that we've also been selling. Actually, I think it's an exclusivity in this kit, this one. We bought it just for this kit. 2 kilograms were made. And Jasmin, who buys the tea off Mr. He, he asked him if he had any special little batches, and he had this 2 kilogram batch, which was just perfect to fill up those kits. And so this is an exceptional batch. It's made with the Jining Bai, which is a little bit like the Bai Yi of Anji Bai Chat, but not quite the same. I'll show you the difference in a minute. And I'm going to infuse it in a bottle. I'm going to infuse it like a long Jing. I'm going to infuse it in this bottle, but I'm going to use just half the capacity. I'm going to make a very concentrate infusion. I've put 4 grams in here. My water is at 80 Celsius, and I'm going to start with a infusion of about 150 ml. Something like this. So this is using your travel bottle as a gong fu method. Let's give that a little 40 seconds. Straight away, things are changing color in there. These leaves are opening up. One of the reasons I chose glass for this one is the way these leaves react in water. Quite beautiful. They're already starting to stand vertical a little and turn that liquid a beautiful golden yellow. Nice. So let's give this a try. So I started with quite a long infusion for this one. I'm going to cut it right down for the second infusion. Ooh, that's smelling pretty good. Here we go. So let's taste this first infusion of our Longjing Jining Bai. Oh. It's like the forest and hazelnuts and rocket. Fresh and bright. And straight away, really nice feeling in the mouth and the throat. Feels like you can breathe even larger than usual when you drink these teas. So this is actually a cultivar that was developed by Mr. He from grafting, and I'm moving straight on to a second infusion because I'm getting excited to taste this on a second infusion. Just going to try and catch up some more of those leaves. I'm going to just do a quick 20-second infusion. This is really starting to fill out in there. Very generous leaves, very fast and powerful in chemistry. It's one of those teas that we love for concentration and focus. It's a great tea in the afternoon to sit and do some writing, some creative work, something that requires a lot of focus. Perfect for that. So a good tea to drink at the beginning of our session will help us focus on some of the other delights that are coming. Yellowy gold color. And here comes second infusion. I've got some greedy folk here in the studio giving me bigger cups than allotted to be filled up with this one. So now we're really filling out, we're getting more into the deep green salady feeling. Hazelnut is a little quieter on this infusion. More mineral, full of amino acid. It's a tea that grows below 1,000 meters, around 800 meters. That's worth a little moment with our eyes closed just for a second. Just to feel the way it travels through our body. Now these beautiful tea chemistry is starting to inhabit our body more perceptibly. Breathing opens up, the feeling of well-being becomes enhanced. The magic leaf. Let's try a third infusion. And just give it a little 20 seconds. Now, quite a few of these leaves are going to be still containing plenty of flavor for more infusions. So you could be saving them. A delight like this, 2 kilograms made in the world, exclusive, rare. I would keep the leaves on one side and I would infuse them again later on. If after our session you feel like you've had enough, you could also put them in the fridge, infuse them again in the morning. Maybe take the time up to 30-40 seconds next time. So let's have a look at let's have a look at these leaves now that they are infused. Wow, looks like every single leaf has been checked in a batch like this. Totally uniform. So for those of you, here's a little bit of geeky information. For those of you that know the Anjibaicha from which this cultivar was developed has a green vein down the center. Whereas this one of the reasons that we call it the Bai white, is that it has a white vein. Beautifully made tea. Actually quite good to eat. So if you don't save the leaves for later, you could put them in a salad also. Quite delicious. Let's enjoy this third infusion. Cheers. Now we're getting into subtle flavour, but very great presence in the mouth. Big mouthfeel. Another example of how a very powerful tea may not necessarily be that punchy in flavour. So, that's 2 teas. 2 very great teas from a fantastic tea maker, Mr. He. Mr. He came to our tea studio in October of 2018, and we were just refining our green tea manufacturing technique. We have the tea studio is a small factory that we have in the south of India in Nilgiri Hills. So Mr. He came, and he came to help us refine our green tea manufacturing technique. He came with a translator and with another friend of ours from Jing, who is a Jing expert. And we have Chinese machines, but we needed some help recalibrating our techniques and our machines. So Mr. He arrived. They arrived from the airport in the middle of the afternoon, and we were all up in the office. We knew they were coming. We were quite excited. We'd made tea. We were ready to receive them, and very excited to have these Chinese visitors in India for the first time. And so they come up into the office, which is upstairs in the tea studio. We start saying hello, and we say hello to the translator who's worked for us for a long time and who we know well. And then we suddenly realized that Mr. He wasn't there. So where is Mr. He? So we had a look around, and we started walking back out to the car to see where he was. And of course he was down in the manufacturing area. The instant that he had arrived, he was on the machines. He was not messing around. He was there to make tea. He was there to do a job. He was very excited to help us out, and he didn't have time for all the pleasantries of hellos. He just wanted to get straight in and start checking out the leaves that we had and so on. So very passionate guy. I have a lot of respect for him, and any of his teas are always worth trying. If you look him up, his name is spelled H-E on our website. There are a few blogs devoted to this great tea maker. So now that's 2 Chinese teas. Let's move country. Let's move over to Japan. So I'm going to get some more teaware out, and let's start by warming up our vessels. I'll just get a little water in here. And you may have noticed this very beautiful teapot that I just put on the tea boat. It is a new baby that I just bought. I'm very, very excited about it and very happy with it. Most of those of us who are very into tea and drink tea regularly, our teaware does start to become more and more important to us. And as you can see, you put it on a boat like this, it certainly enhances our tea preparation area and makes the moment a little bit more special when you've got a beautiful piece of art sitting on the boat there. This is from a new collection. It just came in. It's from Mr. Ito, And I saw it when I came in the store the other day, and I just couldn't resist. The size, the shape, the finish is very tiny. Has even the filter, if I hold it up here, even the filter has been made by hand. I'm going to turn it upside down so you can see the bottom. Just beautiful, hand signed. So now we're talking about the Gongfu style of infusion. If we were in Japan, we would call this Sencha do. Same principle, very small amount of water, large amount of leaf. I've got 5 grams of tea in here. This is a tiny teapot. It's actually a 60 milliliter teapot, but this would work up to probably 100 milliliters. You could add 5 grams and that would be fine. I tend to make tea very strong, but I think this is going to be perfect. In fact, I've already experimented with this and it worked just fine. So I'm going to go very fast here. I'm going to just do a little 15-second infusion to start with. And then I'm going to separate the leaves. As you can see, it pours quickly, which is quite important with a sencha-do pot, because when we are infusing these styles of Japanese tea, they infuse very fast. So we don't want to have a spout or a filter system that blocks and slows down the infused liquid pouring out, because that's adding to our infusion time. As you saw, this just threw it out, and then a few little drips as it came through the leaf, but otherwise nice quick infusion, a nice quick displacement. Here we go. Nice color. And then I'm going to tell you all about it. So let's try this. So this is the Sencha Tenryu, another tiny batch. It comes from a small cooperative by the same name. It's one of those rare teas that we have in Japan that is made start to finish in the same place. Most teas are pushed from one place to another in different stages of the manufacture. I'm going to just show you the dry leaf close up. There we go. Nice long leaves. Rich, full vegetal, mineral. Quite sweet. Quite a sweet sencha. Interesting to have a beautiful sencha like this. Often we have in our range, when we have unusual, rare senchas, we have different cultivars. This is actually the Yabukita, so it's quite a regular cultivar, but just pushed to its prime and made very, very well. It was made by a Mr. Sakai. All the teas over there, you see I'm doing a very quick infusion, about 5 seconds that time. As with all Japanese teas, not really growing very high. This is high, maybe high for Japan, about 400 meters. It was picked in early May. A little grapefruity finish. in there. Second infusion, very rich, umami. Very, very long taste. So interesting to move from a Chinese to a Japanese tea. I find that when we're tasting Japanese teas versus Chinese teas, it's a little bit like Japanese art versus Chinese art. I find that when we're tasting a lot of these Japanese teas, the aesthetic is the humble artisan who's trying to bring out the essential beauty of nature and enhance it, making nature look bigger than it is, very quietly behind the scenes. Seems to sort of be a Japanese theme if you think of Japanese art, a Japanese garden, this enhancing of the beauty of nature, making it more poetic than it is, but without having a humble interaction. Whereas often when we taste the Chinese teas, the actual artisan is often taking more of a front seat. The master, the guy who pans the tea, and the manufacturing technique is a lot more present. Here with a tea like this, we're trying to get back to the flavors of a growing leaf, the source material, this blend of the chance that we get in the garden and the choices that the artisan has made. Here we're very looking for that pure, essential plant essence flavor. So I think this is a good example for that theory. Let's try another one. 10 seconds. Another 2 or 3 infusions after this with this tea, I would think. Let's have a look at the wet leaves just before we taste. In fact, I'm going to hold it up like this because they look great in the teapot. Now that would be great with a little soy sauce on there too. If you have a fancy soy sauce at home, that would be worth. Yeah. Let's taste our. He told me that it was a yabux for those geeks at home that want all the details. Yeah, you can definitely taste the pink socks. Let's just have another little moment of contemplation and housekeeping. How's everybody feeling out there? Now, if you do have any questions while we are tasting, do send it in by message, and I've got my friend here will tell me that if questions come in, and I will do my best to answer any questions. So, Good to keep things tidy, helps keep the mind clear. Well, I'm feeling great. I hope you all at home are feeling as good. I'm feeling very spoiled. We've just got some very beautiful teas so far. I'm going to move on to a fourth tea now. I'm going to pull out another piece of very nice teaware. This is a little teapot that's been in my collection for quite a long time. I actually scooped it up from the book. So if you have the first edition of the book, this is the teapot. Hello everybody. If you are beginning and you are just getting into tea and finding it fascinating and wondering what half the stuff I'm talking about is, but really find it enticing and you want to learn more, there are various different ways of doing it, but one great thing to do, which I would very much recommend to start with, would be to get a copy of this. This is the second edition of our tea book, now published in 5 different languages. It has won World's Best Tea Book a couple of times and is used by many companies as a training manual. It's used by the Canadian Tea Sommelier Program and the Korean Tea Sommelier Program, and a great introduction to learn all the basics about tea. You can use it as a reference book, or you can use it like a magazine that you just dip into now and again, or you could read it cover to cover and become fairly knowledgeable. So this teapot that I'm going to use for our next infusion is not only a superstar, but it's also made of Purian clay, which is a Taiwan clay. It was made in the Lin studios in Taipei, which some of you may have teaware in your collection from the Lin studio. They make some very beautiful stuff. This one is made, like I said, of Purian clay. Now, one of the things with these Xing pots, this is not an Xing pot, but one of the things where we have stoneware pots is that they are not glazed inside. So one thing, the most obvious thing that we think of when we think of teas that are here, and the next tea I make would be a white tea, I would probably get some earthy tones from the pu'er. But the other thing is they change the quality of the water. So when I put water in here, it's going to have a different quality. That means it's going to react differently with the leaves that I put in there too. Today I'm not going to get too geeky about all the chemistry of that. We can do that in another session. But suffice to say that this type of clay, which is the Purian clay, is the definition of the bouquet, the aromatic complexity of the bouquet. So I like this when I'm using it for a very aromatic tea. So I use this for various different teas. And the one I am going to use today is this one, which is the Shan Lin Xi, which is a fairly high mountain in Taiwan. So Taiwanese pot, Taiwanese tea. Not always the case. I do like to mix it up. I like to use Japanese pots for Taiwanese teas, Japanese teas. Now I've put the dry leaves in here straight away before I purified or rinsed or warmed my pot. That's because I'm doing the old lazy man's double function where I rinse the leaves and warm the pot at the same time. Now I'm going to just get a little nose full of some gorgeous aromatics just coming out in that pot. That's nice and warm. The leaves are warm. They're already fairly rehydrated. So with a very tightly rolled leaf like this, I'm going to show you the dry leaf. Here it is. That's the dry leaf. So these have been crunched up like a ball of paper, very, very tightly. These are quite large leaves, and after you've infused this a few times, you're going to notice how large these leaves actually are. So by rehydrating them at the beginning of the process, using this little rinse technique, they are going to be more generous in my first infusion. I could avoid this, but you will find that a very short rinse like this will enhance your enjoyment of the first infusion. So I put 7 grams in here. My water's nice and hot. I'm going to start with a just over 30 seconds of infusion. I'm going to warm the pot from the outside a little. Advantage of the boat is that it's picking up all I spill around it, because I can see there's some action going on inside my teapot as water is being pushed out of the spout as the leaves start to inflate and rehydrate. And here we go. Beautiful golden liquid. Important to make sure that I drain as much as I possibly can out, so that I don't have an infusion continuing in that teapot, which will give me bitterness in my next infusion. This is Singel, very typical cultivar, growing at 1500 meters. Now this tea was made by one of our great producers, Mr. Tenryu. Mr. Tenryu we've been working with for many years, another research institute guy. He teaches tea, he has various different tea operations going on. Competition where the Dongding teas from all the farmers in the Dongding Farmers Association have a chance to put one tea into the annual competition. And then 35 judges spend 2 weeks judging the best oolong out of the 6,000 farmers' best teas of the year. So that's fascinating. We try to get 1 or 2 of the competition winners each year. And if you're interested in more details on that, there's a great blog that explains all how that works. As picked May the 1st, this was picked. Little ground cherry sweetness, wheatgrass background, vanilla finish, very floral. One of these Taiwanese oolongs, they leave beautiful volatiles in the fairness cup. Always worth smelling, and worth smelling what's going on in the cup that you just drunk from. Nice caramel, almost a pineapple-y. Straight on to another infusion. I can go a little shorter now, I think. 20-30 seconds should be good. As we start to approach this style of infusion with the Gongfu method and so on, it's good to use the guidelines to get started. Temperature is important. You want to make sure you're using a reasonable temperature water that suits the tea. Your weights and measures are useful. Seeing as I was setting this up earlier, I used my little scale. I could just as easily have used a teaspoon, which is a standard measure for tea. That's why it's called a teaspoon, and we all have one in the drawer. But there is a tendency when people start getting into this style of infusion to get very technical about it, to get very laboratory and start to treat it as a laboratory experiment. So there is a certain amount of, how would we say, there's something comforting by using that. But what I would encourage is not to get too technical about it. Use the guide as much as you can at the beginning so that you understand the process. After that, start to use your own judgment a little, because when you're using a system of numbers and figures that somebody else has recommended, you don't really get this connection to the process that you will if you start to improvise a little bit. It's at that point that you start to get this great connection with what's happening. So I always recommend, especially when I'm talking to people who are getting very statistical about this infusion for 7 seconds, that infusion for 9, etc. I do always encourage people to have a go, just freestyle. So why not do 2 measured and 1 freestyle is a great way to build up that sort of intuition, the teas, into different. Next infusion here, 3rd infusion. Just delicious. So much definition. Every little flavor point is very, very clear. Beautifully structured. Great delivery. Opens slowly with great promise, and then it delivers a great big punchy flavor. Finishes with the same finesse. Let's have a look at these leaves. So, we've gone from this to this in about 2 minutes of infusion. Great, tasty, definitely worth it. So, yeah, thanks to Mr. Tenryu for that one. Another of our great producers. Fantastic tea. So now, mind's ticking, body's nice and calm. This great combination that we get when we drink a lot of tea of stimulated to sharp mind and nice grounded, comfortable feeling of well-being. And I'm going to make some more tea. I'm not going to stop there. Let's keep going. Right. I'm going to move on to our next vessel. A Guan. Many of you have these at home. I'm sure many of you are at home using a Guan at this moment. Guan is the first step out of the teapot. We often see it as a symbol of the first thing that you do once you move into tea at the next level. It's sort of the symbol of next level. And the beauty of the Guan over Gongfu or Sencha do is that we have a great visual into the infusing leaves. There's something more direct, something more connected. So I have a lot of friends in big tea geeks, and Guan is all they need. Many of us travel with a Guan. It's very, very flexible. The only thing that is difficult to make in a Guan is the Japanese teas with the very small leaf. That can be hard because a lot of it comes out and we don't get to separate. Now, if you have a Guan and you're using it for the first time, I know there are some people that are just getting equipped, and this is one of their first little journeys into this new world. There is a way to hold a Guan at the beginning where you don't burn your fingers. If you look at this top, you notice that it is hollow in here. So because I'm going to use hot water in this vessel, everything is going to get very hot. So the center of here is going to be hot, and the outside is going to be hot. So if I can put my thumb across the top like this without touching the center, I'm going to be okay. I'm not going to burn my fingers. So that's not going to allow me to pick the thing up. So let's get started by putting our hand underneath and our thumb across the top. How's that? So this is a nice beginning way. When you're first starting, I would say this is a great way to start with a Guan. So before you put hot liquid in, give it a try. See if you can turn it over. As you can see, I've got the top angled very slightly so that my infused liquor can pour out here when I separate from the leaves. Can you see this? So let's see if you can hold it in your hand, do a couple of dry runs to see if you're going to be able to do that, because once it's hot, full of hot liquid, we don't want to be burning our fingers. So there you go. You will notice when you're sitting with people that have had Guans for a long time, everybody develops their own style. We all hold our Guans differently. Many of us, after a while, dispense of this piece, mostly because it got lost or broken. And we end up just using these two pieces. So what are we going to drink in this one? We are going to drink a gorgeous Phoenix Oolong. So the first thing I'm going to do, before I do anything else, before I put my leaves in here, is I'm going to show you a nice little trick. I'm going to put a good amount of water in both of my vessels. I'm going to let this warm up. And you empty that out. So it's pretty toasty in here now. I'm going to take my dry leaf and I'm going to pop it into this nice warm Guan. There's no liquid left in there. I'm just pouring dry leaf, warm Guan. Give it a little shake around. Now have a smell. Oh. So that's already giving you loads of really great aromatic volatiles in there. That is just, even if you smell the lid, you're getting some deep, juicy, currant, berries, all sorts of lovely fruity smells coming off that there. So this tea is the Tong Shan. Probably said not very well. My Chinese is not very good. It's the first time we've had this Dansong Phoenix Oolong on the list. So in our dark Chinese oolongs, we have two principal areas. We have those from the Phoenix Mountains and those from the Wuyi Mountains. So today I decided to do this one because this is new, it just came in. The ones from the Phoenix Mountain, we often call them Dashang. And they're usually named, as with this one, after the cultivar. It's a land where the cultivar is very highly respected. And so each one is a subcultivar of a subcultivar developed by grafting and so on. And this specific one is called the Tong, which means heaven sent, as in the smell of heaven. So let's, as with most of our oolongs, we do a little rinse to start with. I've got 7 grams in this tiny little Guan here. You may find that exaggerated, but I like my tea quite punchy. You could go somewhere between 5 and 7 grams and you'd probably get something quite delicious. Nice hot water, 95 degrees. Quick rinse, as you saw, it was a flash rinse. I didn't leave it for 20-30 seconds. Quick water in, water out. Now, after the rinse, definitely time to have a little exploration of the beautiful aromas coming off there. Let's do a 20-second, 25-second infusion. There we go. So I've got my lid tilted and I'm separated. Interesting peachy colour, quite clear. I'll just pour this first infusion and I'll show you these nice dry leaves. Always smell the picture. So here are the dry leaves. Large leaf, rustic manufacture, made principally by hand or in fairly primitive machinery. Long, large twist on the leaf, and this one was plucked and re-roasted in the end of the summer. So we always have the Dansongs coming in late summer, and I know there's quite a few more coming in, something to look out for in the catalogue. Let's taste this first infusion of the Tong Ting Qian. Full, rich aromatics, fruity, floral, caramelized sugar, just bursts straight in the mouth. Gardenia. It's just oozing aromatic chemistry, this tea. In the cup, in the pitcher. Really bred for aromatics. I'm using this Guan. The Guan I'm using is a Duanni, so it's I Ching, and it is a 6-fired Duanni, so it has turned this beautiful darker brown. Usually when we see the Duanni, it is the color of a more yellow, a bit more like a dog biscuit type of color. but this one has been cooked 6 times, which is kind of puts the price up because you always lose a few each time you put it in the kiln. But it gives this fantastic, very vitreous finish, and it gives very bright infusions. It gives a lot of clarity. So for a tea like this, it really picks up the definition and enhances all those very complex layers of aromatics that we get in the tea like this. Straight into a second infusion. Let's just give this a little 10 seconds because it's, you can taste, first infusion you could taste this is really pumping out the flavors. Light color. Some really nice khaki dark greens in the leaf here. Not too roasted. Sometimes these dansongs, when we get them late summer, they're still a little too roasty to drink, so we leave them for a little while. And there are some enthusiasts who will leave a dansong for a year or 2 years before they drink it. There are even some that are specifically made to be consumed a few years later. So there is a small scene of aging these just for a few years, not as much as you would age a pu'er, but just to really give a full roast and let the roast dissipate as part of the flavor profile. Really long, exceptional persistence. So this, as a dansong, we would say this was a medium roast. It's not a heavy roast. It allows some of the green flavor to be retained in the profile. Let's try one more infusion. This has certainly got another 5 infusions probably before these leaves are done. And for those of you that are following at home, I'm sure you're noticing how each infusion is tasting quite different at this point. Quite creamy coconut. This would be 650 meters, not so high. Producer is a Mr. Wei. There's like a fruity cherry start. Very ethereal, and a lot of very top mouth flavors. The bottom of the mouth is left quite subtly affected, but the top of the mouth is really got some exceptional action going on up there. So let's have a look at these leaves. So these are still going to open up a bit more. You can see that deep khaki tone, which is one of the signs that it's a light roast. Easier to see in the infused leaf than it is in the dry leaf. So that feels good. Let's take another moment of contemplation between teas. Give you time to put the kettle on again. As I said, we're going to leave this recording up for a few months, so there will be time to come back and rewind and revisit and do it again, and you've got enough teas to go through this probably twice, so we can do this all over again online. And I'm just enjoying the feeling I've got rushing through my body at the moment. It feels very nice. And usually by this point I can't wait for the next tea, so let's move on. I'm going to use another Guan for this. I'm going to use a Guan that is glazed. This will give me a less reaction with the water. It will give me a very neutral infusion, and that's what I'm looking for in this one. I'm going to do the little warm-up trick and purify my vessels at the same time. Naturally, when we are on the scale of practical to spiritual, there are many different ways to adjust your ceramics as you are working on around the tea boat, as you're manipulating your teaware. The main thing to think about at the beginning, as you're placing things, is how is my hand going to reach for this thing? Where do I need it to be? I need this to be on this side because I'm going to pour from here to here. I'm going to pick this up with the spout here so that when I come here, I'm in the right angle for pouring. So little touches like that add to your connection to the process. So this is part of the fun of doing this. And then as you get more and more into it, you can get more and more into the details, but you can also add certain flair. If you've seen some of the ladies in China doing a Gong Fu Cha ceremony, they have some beautiful, very graceful manners and special, very delicate ways of holding the porcelain and maneuvering the porcelain. Different regions, they have different schools and different methods. And I've seen some very beautiful displays of manipulating the teaware on the boat. So that's something to think about. It just enhances the moment. What we're basically looking for is a moment of focus, where either we're sat alone or we're sat with some friends, and the process and the tea that we are infusing has a little bit more focus than it would when we are just drinking a pot of tea and busy doing something else. So it's a way of creating a nice calm moment. We don't have the television here. We don't have other forms of disturbance. We might have a little music in the background, but We're trying to create a moment of calm where we can really explore the beauty of this fantastic leaf in all its wonderful, diverse forms. So I've warmed my Guan, glazed Guan, so I'm not going to get any feedback off the clay. I'm going to have a nice neutral infusion. Seeing as I was talking a lot, I'm just going to warm it up again because I do like that just for that first little moment of analysis, and this is one that works really well. And there's something in this very first approach that we get in the nose, that we're getting in the volatiles coming off the dry leaf when they're warmed up like this. There is a certain extra flavor group that we don't have in all black teas, but is present in this one. I'm going to talk about that a bit more in a minute, but this is yet another tea by the superstar Mr. He. This is a Wu Yi cultivar, so we're not going to taste a Wu Yi today. We had a Dansong. I was talking about the two styles of oolongs, the Wu Yi and the Dansong. We're not going to taste a Wu Yi, but we're going to taste a black tea made from a Wu Yi cultivar outside the region of Wu Yi. It's actually made in down in Jinhong, down in Zhejiang, and this is the Jin Yin Zen. So it is a very beautiful black tea. You can see how nicely it's been made. Very, very great, very tiny twist manufacture. I'm going to show you the dry leaf. Here we go. There. Oh, Right, well, we're starting to goof around here in the studio a little. My microphone is falling off. First infusion, let's try an infusion of, let's say 30 seconds just to get started. I put 5 grams in here. I'm not going to fill my Guan because this is a giant Guan. I am going to, however, take this out. And I'm just going to leave that little 30 seconds. Enjoy the warmth. So I have friends that will, during a tea session, during this time, they will just take a moment and they will count breath instead of using a timer. And that's a nice way to time your teas. I find after 30 years in the business, I tend to not use a timer or a scale. I just go by instinct. As a result, I sometimes mess up, but each time I mess up, I learn something. When you make a tea too strong, you learn all sorts of things about its flavor profile that you'd never learn unless you'd made that mistake. So it's not the end of the world. Let's just smell this. Ooh, so fruity. Guan, so we've got the volatiles, we've got the leaf. Again, notice at this point how everything here, leaf, inside of the lid and the pitcher are all smelling different. This is the volatiles coming off the liquor, this is the steam, and this is what's left in the leaf at this point. So we've got 3 different aroma groups going on here. Let's have a taste. First infusion of the Jin Yin Zen. The colors are really beautiful. Sweet potato and dried fruit. This is a very multi-layered tea. We've got a group of aromas in our top mouth. We've got the tongue. We've got stuff going on under the tongue as well. This is not a roasted tea, so this is a black tea. So it's a full oxidation. Now, when we smelt the dry leaf, we noticed this interesting, funky little aroma coming off the dry leaf. This is because that we're using in this type of manufacture a covered oxidation. So during the covered oxidation, this builds up some heat in the leaves that are oxidizing, slows down the oxidation a bit because they have less air coming in, but it also builds up a little bacterial activity. So we start to get this slight fermentation, a little bit sideways from a straight open room oxidation. We start to get this little funky taste, which is quite common in this part of China, and actually quite adds this extra angle to this tea and to this style. So let's try a second infusion. We'll look out for this in our second infusion. You don't need to give that long. I think a little 15 seconds is going to be fine here. So this group I'm talking about, this flavor group I'm talking about, you can smell it in the lid here. A little in the leaf. Let's taste this second infusion. Very complex tea. This is one of those flavors that has an apparent first impression of something that is quite simple and rustic. But then as the flavor develops in your mouth, we notice that it's very multi-layered. It has a lot of, it's like a few different teas going on in your mouth at the same time. There's an aromatic greenness. There's a more rich, a more rich sort of sweet potato-y kind of central flavor. And then there's this under the tongue background of that little funky fermentation, which is just delicious, and just sets it off in a slightly different direction and gives it that extra aspect. Great afternoon tea. A great thing to do with the Jin Guan Yin. So, though it does make a spectacular oolong, very interesting in a black tea form. I think I'm going to do one more infusion of this one. Again, a tea that's going to keep on going, this one. It's going to give another 5-10 infusions, this. And just give that a little, maybe 30 seconds. Mr. He's garden is fully organic. As I said, he has many different sections of different cultivars growing. He experiments with all different kinds of manufacture. Oops. All different kinds of manufacture. And he is quite a master in many of them. We actually helped him out this year because he doesn't have many clients outside of China, and we wanted to help him get his organic certification, which, as those of you that are in the tea industry know, international certification for a garden to become organic is around $6,000 per year. So that is quite a lot for a small farmer to put out if he's only got 1 or 2 clients outside the country, and really not worth it for international certification. For some reason, there is no sliding scale. Small farmers and large farmers don't necessarily have different fees to pay. So we helped him out this year to get his organic certification. Which allows us to actually write organic after his teas, though all of his teas are fully organic. A great spring tea, black tea, made in the early April. What a treat. So let's have a look at the wet leaf of this. Deep red and khaki leaves here. Beautiful tea. So yes, another little moment of contemplation and recognition for these fantastic leaves that we are lucky to have access to. Again, if you have questions, feel free to send in a question. I'll do my best. If you are finding it's going too fast, or you've already had enough tea, then don't worry, because this session is up for months. So you can always come back. You can press pause, come back later. If you have, if you're watching and you didn't pick up the kit that we're tasting, don't worry about that either, because we still have a few kits left. We have a few in stores, and we also have a few on the web. And I think because of interest, we can also make up a couple of extra kits if we need. So don't worry about that. It's a great activity to sit down with and do with a few friends also. So if you've done it once on your own and you feel like doing the same with a few friends, let's do that. I'd be happy to join you all. So let's have another tea. I'm going to move to a different type of teaware here. I'm going to need this still, but I'm going to move back to the Guan. Coincidentally,
It's not a guy one.
it's not a Gaiwan, thank you. I'm not moving. I'm moving away from the Gaiwan and back into the Gomku.
Don't speak English.
So, fortunately, I've got people here to correct me. I am stepping away from the Gaiwan and I'm moving back to the little Gongfu pot. A beautiful piece, by coincidence, also from the Lin studio. This is a celadon glaze, which is one of those classic Chinese glazes that you've probably seen in Chinese teaware catalogues or Chinese teaware stores. There are a few different versions of celadon. Some are bluish, some are greenish, and it is a high temperature glaze, traditional glaze. And one of the problems with this is because of the temperature we need to do it with, we always lose a few pieces each time. Again, repeated kiln activity results in more broken pieces, so that puts up the price of your finished piece. So often there's a little price ticket on the celadon. This one I particularly like the shape. It's a modern version of a traditional shape, and I think it's done quite beautifully. I'm going to warm up the teapot, purify my pieces, and reach for my next tea. All right, another tea, another country this time. Let's put this in here. I'm going to move to the Indian Himalayas. As those of you that know me, my career was built around the buying and selling and drinking of Darjeeling tea. Though, as you can see, I enjoy teas from all over the world. Darjeeling is still my go-to. Good Darjeeling is world-class, fantastic, exceptional tea. Medium Darjeeling is not necessarily the best, so I often talk to people who've never tasted good Darjeeling, and they are, yeah, you know, I love tea and I drink all sorts of tea, but I don't really get Darjeeling. Well, often you find out in the end that it's because they haven't tasted a good one. And if you haven't tasted a good one, you're about to taste one now. Darjeeling is a fascinating area. It is high in the Himalayas. It began to be planted in the 1850s. This particular tea is from plants that were planted in 1860. So very old plants, deep roots, seed-grown plants. And this is a tea that was made from one of those heritage sections of plants. It's from the garden called Singel. I chose it for today because we've tasted a lot of teas that are big on aromatic bouquet and so on. This one has a very subtle, compressed flavor and a very powerful energy. It has that flavor of old tea, deep roots. Those of you who drink a lot of Shengpuer, you will see a lot of similarities with this tea. It's a tea that I've taken to China and tasted with people in China regularly, and a big favorite over there. I often get the response, I know this tea, but what is it? I just can't put my finger on it, because the terroir, the Indian terroir, the Himalayan terroir, the land up there, gives a different twist to these beautiful plants. These particular plants originally came from Wuyi, so they're high quality plants used for very aromatic teas, but they're growing in very, very high conditions, slightly different seasonal context, deep valley, different sun hours per day, and also they are high altitude, very slow growth. So when you slow the growth down, we get different patterns, we get different aromatics, we get different cycles going on in the plants through each month, through each year, through each season. All the seasonal mechanisms of the plant begin to change to suit the environment that they're growing in. So these are the effects of terroir that we talk about when we're talking about terroir. Before we start talking about the other things like insects and so on. These are just the basic reactions to the growing seasons that are in that area. So when they first started planting tea around India, to find a better way to get a standardized product and to work on replacing the Chinese monopoly of tea, they tried the teas that they had around India, and they had two types of tea at that time. They had seeds that had come in from China, and they had also found the Assamica plant. The Assamica plant, they found it up on the border of Burma in northeastern India, which, if you look at a map, is really not far from the Yunnan. So large leaf jungle tea plant, you can see where that was coming from. So the Assamica did really well in those jungle conditions, and the seeds that came in from China did really well up in the mountains. This one, these Darjeeling plants were growing at higher altitudes than they'd been grown before. We just tasted the Dashang growing at 650 meters. We have Wuyis that are growing, at 1,000 meters, around that. But this is growing really quite a bit higher. So we've got different conditions. We've got different valley formation. We've got all the weather coming down from the Tibetan plateau. So quite a different story. And they found, when they put these plants up there, that it gave this amazing marriage of plant material with terroir. Something new, magic. An important milestone in tea history was this time when they found out that they could grow tea up in the Indian Himalayas, which of course spread to the Nepalese Himalayas. And let's drink some. So not really a tea that we often think of as drinking in this Gong Fu Cha style. Again, if you need any of the measurements, any of the recommended methodology, you'll find it on the website. You look up Singel on the website, you'll see there are two things to click down at the bottom in the infusion technique. One is teapot technique, and the other is the Gong Fu technique. So that's what I'm using today. I put 7 grams in this tiny little teapot. I'm doing a 20-second infusion to get started. Here we go. Make sure we don't have any liquor sat among the leaves infusing. We don't want to spoil our second infusion. So one of my favorite tricks in a tea session like this, when we've been drinking Wuyis and Pu'ers and fancy Chinese teas, is to throw in Darjeeling without saying anything. Always a great party pleaser. It's a great, worth a try if you haven't done that before. I'm going to show you the dry leaves. Quite a scrappy little broken leaf. Not the most beautiful of leaves to look at. Beauty is, of course, in the eye of the beholder. Let's taste this liquor. Mineral and peppery. Vegetal. So the age-old question, is Darjeeling First Flush a black tea? It's a very good question. When we make Darjeeling First Flush, we make it in a completely different way. There isn't really another tea on the planet that is made this way. We use the Indian Orthodox black tea manufacture parameters, but we shake them up a little bit. So at the beginning of the process, when we're doing this style of manufacture, we always do what is called a wither. So the wither is the way that we reduce the moisture at the beginning of the process to trap in the aromatics. So in the spring, we have some fantastic aromatics in these leaves. It's a very exciting time in most of the tea growing regions for springtime aromatics. That's what we're waiting for at that time. So Darjeeling is no different. During the winter, the plants have been dormant, the starch reserves have been building up, the sap has become thicker and thicker with all those beautiful aromatics, and the leaves are going to grow very, very slowly at the beginning of the season. We're going to have these small, dense, juicy, very aromatic leaves. So to trap this extra aromatic activity into those leaves, we're going to use a withering at the beginning, which is extended to trap and dry a lot of that stuff into the leaf before we pass it on to the next part of the process, where we would usually leave more juice in the leaf so that it goes nice and brown as we put it through the process. Here we've made the leaf a lot drier at the beginning. So as we pass it through to the rolling and we break the exterior membrane and then we leave it just for a short time in air to oxidize, we're coming out with a final product that is quite green. And it means we've trapped all those beautiful springtime aromas into the leaf. And this, we call it a hard wither tea. So where it is a style of black tea, it's a hard wither black tea. And the interesting thing is that we have done experiments with the same parameters, first flush parameters, first flush parameters that we have used for teas in Darjeeling, where I have recommended certain timings to a producer, and they've produced a tea like the Turbo, and it's come out just how we wanted, just as we asked for. So we used the same parameters in China with a similar looking leaf with our friend Mr. He. So Mr. He made a first flush Chinese tea for us, and we tasted this tea, and we were very happy with it. We bought the tea, we put it in the catalogue, and then we said to Mr. He, well, what do you think? Do you like this tea? And he said, I love it, it's delicious, but what the hell is it? He didn't know what to call it. It was not an oolong, it's not a green tea, it's not a white tea. For him, it wasn't a black tea. So the way we differentiate it is we call it a hard wither black tea. So that's the story of the black tea of this time. So it is a black tea, but it's made with a hard wither process. Second infusion. I'm just going to leave this for a little 10 seconds. Slowly does it. So when you look at then you will see the invoice number, because these are all single invoice. They were made on one single day. Almost all the teas in our catalogue were made on one specific day. Thus our buying technique, where we go over there, we taste all the different days of manufacture, and then we select the day when everything just aligned, and the choice of the artisan that makes the tea met with what had happened to the plants in the garden, and everything just came together to make the best invoice. We call it an invoice because that will be packed up, and then in India's case, that will usually be sent to the auction, to be sold in the auctions. So it's named, the name of that lot or batch is an invoice. So we have the invoice number, and then the next thing we write is either classic or clonal. So this would be a classic Darjeeling. So the classic Darjeeling are the old guard, original plants planted by seed, which differentiates them from the new plants. The new plants, we call them the clonal. These have been done by grafting or by clonal cuttings, and usually by clonal propagation. So when we do clonal propagation, we fill a field with one mother plant, many cuttings from the same plant, so we end up with a field full of the same plant. Whereas here we're talking with a field full of seed-grown plants, and if you walk in a seed-grown section of tea, you'll notice that the leaves of each plant are different. So not only that, the flavor profile of each plant is also slightly different. So here we're talking about a very, very complex flavor without the highlights and simplicity that you get when you have a field full of the same plant. So that's the basic differential. So here we sometimes hear the difference compared to some complex jazz versus some really good rock and roll. Rock and roll is more simple, but can also really move you. Jazz takes a little bit more understanding. It's not necessarily as easy to read, but it could have all the complexity, perhaps even more, that is quite seductive. That's delicious. So there are some years when my best Darjeeling of the year is a clonal, and other years when my best Darjeeling of the year is a classic. A few really good ones to look out for this year. And with the second flush just starting to come in, we have a Castleton second flush, which is not to miss. One of the best fantastic tea, black tea. Try a little bit of this and you'll understand what we're talking about. One more infusion of this. This is a great way to drink Darjeeling tea. Just give that a few seconds, a little 20-30 seconds. Let's taste our third infusion of the Darjeeling Singel, classic Darjeeling, 1860 plants. let's have a look at the infused leaf. See what those scrappy leaves turned into. A good example on not to judge the flavor of a tea just by when you taste something like this. It's hard to argue with. Delicious, punchy, a lot of vitality, very exciting cup of tea. So, let's just take a moment. Clean up. We can welcome our next tea. How's everybody feeling? I'm feeling pretty fine. I'm going to an old friend that's been in my collection for a long time. I'm going to warm up the pot a little first. Now, one thing we often, one impression that we often have as we start learning about tea and reading about tea, and we start reading about the traditions and about the heritage, about the history and the legends and so on, it starts to give us an impression that the world of tea is static. But it's really not the case. All the regions, they have a very, very strong domestic market. That means they have local buyers wanting better quality every year. They're continually pushing the envelope, increasing the quality, making things better. Other people are developing new teas. They have trends just as we have trends over here. In China, a few years ago, we had a big black tea trend, so everybody was making black tea. At the moment, China is seeing a flavored tea trend going through. Markets change, interests change. Sometimes the focus is very much on health. We've seen how the health focus has really put a big slant on people buying matcha and buying high antioxidant teas and so on. So this idea that things are static and things that this tea has always been made the same way, it always tasted exciting. And our collection at Camellia sinensis here is very much built on flavor experience. So we try not to tie ourselves down too much to only having the classic tea from the classic ground, from the classic manufacturing technique, and so on and so on. We're very open to trying new things. We find it very exciting to see the experiments that our friend Dr. He is doing. We find it very exciting to see developments in Taiwan, the way things we just drink. This is pop music if you give it to somebody old in Taiwan to taste. This is the new stuff. This is what the kids are drinking. So even in these areas where they've been drinking tea for centuries, things are changing continually. So we think it's very important to keep on a lot of different projects around the world, either places that have been years where their crop is failing and they're actually putting tea in the ground instead. Another thing that does start to happen, I was talking about of the next generation who have grown up on the fat of the land of an area that has done very well, and all the producers have become quite wealthy, and they sent all their children away to school, and then their children are coming back from school and they don't really have that connection with the land and that connection to the product that their ancestors or their forefathers had. So sometimes in these areas where the teas sell really well just because there's a prestige comes from a very important tea growing region, doesn't necessarily mean that that is a certificate of quality. We're seeing a lot of very great teas being produced outside these regions as well. Not to say that within these regions they don't have generations and generations of build-up of evolution of skill. Of course they do, but we just can't we can't close our minds to this. So the next tea I'm going to show you is an example of this. It's an example of us looking outside a traditional region for new products. So the next product, or the next tea, just make sure this is empty, is in our Pu'er range. It's in our Pu'er Sheng range, and it is a new fresh tea that has just come in. We try to balance our collection. We have a beautiful antique collection of very old teas. For those of you that know our collection, we have a very nice collection. We have other stuff aging in the cave, in the cellar, that we're going to bring out later. We try to rotate so that we always have stock from previous years, which gets more and more difficult. Naturally, these teas go up every year with price, so they're harder and harder to buy. I think at some point, those of us that have tasted pre-2000 teas will be the lucky ones, and the rest will be just wishing that they had. So each time you taste something pre-2000, think yourself a lucky person, because they're not going to be around for much longer. So I'm going to try something from our other range of teas. What we have been doing is we have been traveling the classic regions of tea in the Yunnan, and we've been buying single terroir leaves and pressing them into fresh cakes so that we can age them ourselves. We decided that we can't just be buying old teas with very high prices. We also need to look forward to the future and look to what we can do in the future and have stock for the future. So we're buying good leaf, pressing it into cakes, single origin, with all the information on the brick, and so this is an example of one of our teas from this year, 2020, that we just picked up. I'm going to put it in the pot, and then I'm going to tell you a bit more about it. Put all those leaves in. I'm going to do a little rinse to get started. Make sure there's no dust on there. Let's have a little smell. That's smelling good. So this is what we're having a look at. This tea here, 2020 collection of our fresh pressings. It's the Yonda Dashang. It's from a 70-year-old tree. And for this tea, we decided to leave the traditional mountains of Sichuan and go a little further north into the Linsang area. And we visited an area that is more famous for shu pu'er, for the accelerated fermentation process, where we have dark, rich, full-bodied pu'ers that are fresh from the factory. So we went to one of these regions, and you can see the compression, not too tightly pressed, plenty of buds, breaks nice and easily. I got 5 grams in this teapot. I'm not going to fill it all the way up because this is a bigger teapot than I would usually use. always used for my pu'ers, this teapot. I'm just going to give a little 10-second infusion. Here we go. And interesting how things have changed, and tastes have changed, and interests have changed over the years. Know how old it was. It was a little bit like people getting into wine for the first time, thinking that the oldest wine was the best wine. Obviously, that's not necessarily the case. And then over time we learn that there are some that are good to drink fresh, there are some that are good to age, there are some that are good to drink fresh and then to age. So buy a few bottles of one and age a few for the future. So this would fall into that category of something that is good to drink now and is also going to be very good to age. Mellow and sweet, aromatic, quite floral. And with a light infusion like that, no bite. This is one of those sheng pu'er that you could give to someone and they might not know what it is. You might leave them guessing. It still has that deep old tree feeling, but as far as the mouthfeel and the aromatics go, it has a very aromatic, almost oolong-y kind of attack. One thing I've noticed also over the years that people are drinking fresher and fresher tea. Certainly in our team over the years, I see the employees of the company getting into pu'er, usually into the deep, dark, earthy, rooty flavors. And then as they get more and more interested, more getting into the plant material of the fresh sheng. Fresh sheng has a very specific buzz to it. So also as you start to explore the different body sensations and body feel of different teas, sheng is a great way to explore that side of tea. I'm going to give this just another little 15 seconds. Great colour, nice clear, crisp looking liquid. Even in the last few years, buying these teas from the Yunnan, I've noticed how in many of them the rusticity that we used to find in these teas has been tempered in many of them. There are many of these new pu'ers that we're getting now, these pu'er cakes, and there's a lot less of those farmy, earthy, smoky flavors. It varies, some of them there are, and it gives a very nice authenticity when it gives it a very taste of real, and also it speaks of the environment that it was prepared in. But there's also a large amount of these new sheng pu'ers that are coming out, and they have a lot of finesse and a lot less of the markings of the pu'ers that we were buying even 10 years ago. Crisp and bright and light. So if I was going to buy this, I'd buy 2 cakes. In fact, that's what I did. I took 2 cakes home. One of them I'm drinking straight away, and the other I've just put it away for a rainy day. So that's always a good way to buy pu'er cakes. This is going to age really nicely. From Yonda in the Linsang area. Big old Darjeeling leaf on a 70-year-old plant. Let's do one more infusion. And this is going to keep going all afternoon. I'll give it a little 20 seconds. I've had this teapot for about 20 years, I think, over 20 years. So it's nice to think back to all the people that have sat around the table while this teapot's been on the boat doing its work. So I put them in the pot and keep infusing for, I don't know how many infusions are left in here, but a lot. Just look at these beautiful leaves. I'm driving the tech crew crazy here. So third infusion of our Yonda Dashang from this year's collection. What a splendid collection of teas. Very, very nice. I'm going to raise my cup to everybody at home. Thank you so much for joining us. Don't forget that if you want to redo, this video is up for a while. If you need another kit, we've still got a few left. If you need a kit because you've just been listening but you didn't taste any of these delights, we still have a few